Heinz is proud to partner The Urbanist on Monocle Radio. Heinz is a leading global real estate investment manager. Heinz owns and operates $93 billion of assets across property types and on behalf of a diverse group of institutional and private wealth clients. Heinz' ambition? Well, in the words of its chairman and CEO Jeffrey Heinz, to be the best real estate investor, manager and partner in the world. Find out how Heinz is making that dream a reality. Head to heinz.com now. Heinz, a leader in real estate investing and management since 1957. Hello and welcome to The Urbanist, Monocle's programme all about the built environment. I'm your host, Andrew Tuck. Coming up.
We now know what to do, much more than before, where we just say, forest fire or cars. But also knowing what to do does not lead to a full solution. It's actually implementing it.
How can Bangkok tackle its suffocating air pollution? With a recent ranking of 4th worst in the world when it comes to air quality, we hear how the Bangkok Metropolitan Administration is taking steps to combat the problem, which is choking its citizens and its economy. Then, we explore a soon-to-be-realised mega-development in central London, which is putting community at its core.
We knew that we wanted to deliver a mix of uses, but really we've pushed the boundaries as to quite how much space we can create on the site and how we can bring those uses together most effectively.
All that ahead in the next 30 minutes, right here on The Urbanist with me, Andrew Tuck. We start today in Thailand, where the capital city, Bangkok, has recently been blanketed by choking air pollution. In late January, Bangkok was ranked as the 4th worst city for air pollution on Earth. One of the particular forms of air pollution that has been affecting Bangkok, known as PM 2.5, impacts health and is also damaging tourism, a major source of revenue for Thailand. Pon Prom Vikitstrath is Chief Sustainability Officer at the Bangkok Metropolitan Administration, the government department that's working on solutions to this most pressing issue. Monocle's Gary Boyle recently spoke to Pon Prom, and he began by describing some of the causes for this PM 2.5 pollution.
The PM 2.5 in Bangkok can be divided into 3 pillars. So the first pillar happens all year round, which is the pollution that comes from the city. So we call it in-source pollution. For example, transportation, industrial, and some small burnings. So that actually happens all year round from the winter season, summer season, rainy season. And you can see that it's not too bad. Like it's around 10 to 20 microgram per cubic meter. So still in the blue-green level. So that's the first factor. The second factor is a seasonal factor. It comes during December, January, and February. This is when what we call inversion. So let's say the ceiling of the room suddenly compresses. So the same amount of pollution you have from in-source pollution, but with this inversion, it would just suddenly cause the PM levels to spike up. Maybe from 10 to 20 up to 40, 50. That's when you get to the yellow-orange levels. The third factor is there's biomass burning outside of Bangkok in the surrounding areas, and the wind direction brings it into the city where the wind stays and the smoke stays as well. So once you have the 3 factors coming at the same time, mostly in January, that's where you get the levels up to around 70 or 80, or what we call the red alert level. So we can see that it's seasonal, it's in-source, but also from factors outside of Bangkok that combine together to make one of the tricky situations in the city.
Okay, so you listed various factors, some of which can be within your control and some of which, like the weather, we can't control that. What measures can the BMA do to combat the pollution in Bangkok?
So back to the 3 pillars I told you, we can control the first one. Just talking about the first factor, right? Transportation make up around 60% of it. So we have many old cars, old diesel cars. What the governor tried to do is to use economic incentives to encourage people to improve their car, maintain their car. So we did a study saying if you just change your oil engine, change your air filter, every year, and especially in winter months, you can help reduce the emissions from your car by 50%. So we encourage people to get their maintenance in November, December. How do we do that? We work with oil companies, the big petrol stations and car manufacturers, and we ask them, can you give a discount to people coming to change their car during this period? So they say, okay, they give 50% for oil engine change, free labor costs, free air filter change. So we get a lot of people coming to use this service during that season. Nearly 300,000 cars already did the maintenance and put their name in our registry. So 300,000 cars, these already, we can say, reduce their emissions by 50%. So can help a lot. We also did, for the first time ever in Thailand, the so-called low emission zones, where you have many in different cities around the world. But for us, it can only happen when the PM level reaches a certain level, so red alert level. The governor can announce being a low emission zones, and we can prevent trucks, 6-wheelers up coming into the city center. So we announced it 2 weeks ago, and we can see the decline in the emissions from that area in the city center quite evidently. So this is a measure that we look to expand as well. Not only 6-wheelers, maybe we in the future increase to covering 4-wheelers, pickup trucks, also announcing the red alert zone a little bit easier so we can announce it more often.
I know one of the measures you took as the BMA during the recent PM 2.5 spike was closing a lot of public schools, but also what the government did was make public transport free for 1 week, which was the buses, SkyTrain and the MRT underground system. What was the cost of that measure and how effective do you think it was?
Before they started the free campaign, this is the national government, by the way, we don't have the power as a local authority to do such policy. They said it will cost 140 million baht, but we have to see at the end of the campaign how much it really costs. So that's up for the government to share to the public.
Let me just clarify, 140 million baht is about 3 million pounds.
Yes, and in terms of the success or not success, we'll have to see in terms of pollution control, because they say that more people use the public transport system, but not necessarily meaning, PM levels reduce or not. But it's something that the government have to do further study on to see that if it's an effective measure or not, and whether it should be doing in the next year, couple years, and is it cost effective. But it's a good initiative that the government tries to do.
Bangkokians have a real strong love affair with their cars, despite the fact that the city is often gridlocked. It's quite famous for its heavy traffic jams. How do you convince people to get out of their cars and use public transport?
Yes, very good question. I think actually the reason why people don't use public transport too much actually is not about the cost. So we still question if whether the free access for the SkyTrains are a good measure or not. The problem that people in Bangkok don't use the public transport system is because it's still difficult for them to get to their nearest station. Like from their homes to the nearest train station is still an obstacle. And maybe from the destination train station to where they want to go is still that gap. So we call this first and last mile. I think this is the most important thing. How do we bring people into the mass transit network as good as possible? So what we try to do is what we call a capillary transportation work. So looking at the first and last mile system, we go to analyze where is the area of high population density, like the communal centers, the big high-rise buildings, flats, etc. And where's the nearest train station to them? And do the infrastructure part as good as it can be. Doing the bike sharing lane, increasing the footpath, making it as nicely walkable as possible. If it's further out, we have a shuttle bus that bring just from A to B, from the area of where people live to the nearest train station, back and forth, just to bring people onto the public rail system. So I think this is very important. If the people can feel like they can easily get onto the network for them to go somewhere, then they use the train system more. But if they say, oh, it's such a difficult task for them to go to the nearest train station, it will be much easier for them to just get on the car and drive. right? So less about the cost, more about the accessibility. In Europe or somewhere it's nicer to walk, right, because of the temperature. You can walk 1 kilometer to your nearest train station, but we have to admit that in Bangkok, no one's going to walk 1 kilometer, especially start of the day that they want to go to work fresh. So we have to make it as accessible and convenient for them.
I know one of the BMA's main initiatives, and I think your personal initiative, is to increase the amount of green space in the city. You were telling me earlier that the BMA has planted more than 1 million trees, saplings around the city. You also talked about a project where you're trying to make a green space accessible to everyone in the city within 15 minutes walk of their home, and also developing urban forests, for example, a landfill that you're currently turning into an urban forest. How important are these projects, not only for the mental well-being of Bangkokians, I guess, but mostly, I guess the question is, how effective are these green spaces in reducing air pollution?
So I think the adding green space, trees and parks are extremely important for the city of Bangkok. Of course, air pollution is one reason why we need to. For example, when we increase the footpath, make it wider, more accessible, we add more trees. This is to increase canopy shades for people who like to walk. If they want, they can walk further and they can reach the nearest train station easier. They'll use the public transport, just like what I mentioned. Trees also help to filter all the air pollution. For example, they can help filter PM10, which is one of the key pollutants. And once we wash the leaves of the tree, the dust fall to the ground, so actually it does not spread back into the air. So that's a very good thing. Trees provide shade, of course, and in the future, the heat issue will become more and more important in Bangkok as the temperature rises, gets more humid because of the change related to climate change. So I think also very important. Adding public parks is critical. We have 70 monitoring stations for PM 2.5, 50 outside of the parks, 20 inside of the parks, just to see the baseline for the city. It's evident every day during low PM days, high PM days, that the monitor stations in the park are much lower than outside. So the more green spaces we add, the area will help to sequester and also help to be a protected zone for PM 2.5. So when we add just small pocket parks, I go and test out the air quality levels, always below the outside park. So I think we try to add more, and that's why we added 200 pocket parks already. So a pocket park could be any size, but always quite relatively small, because we find them near to the community places. It could be from empty lands or old car parks. We turn it into a small park. This is also useful for PM 2.5 as well. Why? Because in the past, if the big parks are located in the city center, people have to drive just to use the park. People already have to drive to go to work or to go shopping. Adding park to one of their lists just add to the traffic, add to the car pollution. But if we can bring the park near to their home, instead of driving, they can just walk to their local park. That's why we want to have it spread as much as possible, especially in the outer Bangkoks, where the city is moving outside because of the expensive parts in Bangkok. In the city center is now getting filled up. More people are deciding to move outside. So the services, basic services like the parks, transportation needs to follow as well. Or else if they move outside and they still have to drive in the city center, it would just cause more pollution, cause more traffic to the city.
Should Bangkokians be optimistic? Do we see a future of less air pollution in the city?
So have to go back to where the pollution come from, really understand, which I believe now that we truly understand what are the root causes. And then once we understand, we have to do the targeted policy. For example, in Bangkok, we understand it's about cars, it's about old cars. Of course, we want everyone to change to EV, but because of the economic cost, no one can just suddenly wake up and change their EV. That's why we do something like air filter change, engine change, and encourage them. This is targeted policy. For outside of Bangkok, biomass burning have to be targeted too. What is being burned outside of Bangkok? It's not sugarcane, like people say. It's not wood fire, like in the north, forest fire. It's rice husk after rice farming. It's easiest way for the farmers to get rid of their leftover stuff just to burn. How do we encourage them not to burn? We have to find solution. Even in farmlands in Bangkok, the governor bought them like a tractor. The tractor that can also cut the rice husk, compress the rice husk into a block. And once they have a block in the farm, we find a buyer for them. The buyer could be for animal feed, for power plant, or even, like the concerts where you sit on the rice husk blocks, like a cowboy style. So that also pay a very good price. We find the buyer for them. This is circular economy. What they used to burn, treat it as waste and burn, now they treat it as a resource that they can sell. If we can do this for outside of Bangkok, where there are much, much more burning hotspots, then it could be a solution. And of course, there are also struggles with trans-boundary haze. So the government, especially the foreign ministry, need to work very hard to find a solution with our neighbors. Because, of course, admittedly, there are still burnings. And of course, a lot of the burnings is due for products that are coming back to Thailand. So they understand this. Coming back to the question, are we optimistic? We now know what to do, much, much more than before, where we just say, forest fire or cars. Now we know, and we know what to do. But also knowing what to do does not lead to a full solution. It's actually implementing it effectively and doing economic tools, using legal tools, everything in our power, we have to do it. And once people can see that, yes, and then they can become optimistic.
Pom Prom Vikitsrath there, speaking with Gary Boyle. Next, we visit The Round, a new 1 million square foot landmark net zero development, which is set to start construction in central London this year, thanks to real estate developers Hines and architects Foster and Partners. Well, I'm pleased to say that I'm joined now by representatives from both companies, Ross Blair, head of the UK at Hines, and Russell Hales, senior partner at Foster and Partners. Well, thank you both for being here. Ross, we're going to start with you. Now, this project sits in the centre of London, just south of the river, and has lots of high-profile neighbours. Tell us what exactly was your vision for what would be constructed on this site.
The location you refer to in itself was one of the most appealing factors to us. If you imagine central London as a dartboard and you threw a bullseye, you'd pretty much hit this site. So that in itself, being able to deliver a project of scale that we'll talk about now in such a central location, adjacent to the river, adjacent to the curve of the river, which gives you these tremendous views all around you, was really something pretty special as far as we're concerned. And again, for those that don't know it, it's a cleared site. It's sat there pretty much empty for almost 20 years now. So it's crying out to be developed. And it's also a part of central London that allows you to go high. So lots of rare commodities that are really unrepeatable as far as we're concerned. And we're lucky to have an account that is looking to deliver these trophy projects that once built out, we are then planning to hold forever. So working with the Foster's team, we've spent the past couple of years imagining what that space can be and how we can bring all these different uses to bear on site and what the benefits are of bringing different uses on site together at the same time. So the project it's 3 towers. So the largest tower is an office tower of about 800,000 square foot net, which is 45 stories tall. Then we have 2 residential towers. One is private homes, so about 300 private homes. That's about 40 stories tall, then a 25-storey affordable tower providing another 150 or so homes, all connected by this 3-level podium centering around The Round, which is what the project's become known as. So a place for gathering, but not only a place to gather the uses that we're creating, but a place to gather the community. So we're really looking to connect a private sector development that's focused on high rent-paying tenants and high rent-paying residents, but looking to integrate that scheme with the community. So we knew that we wanted to deliver a mix of uses, and the planning policy dictated that that's what this site could accommodate. But really working again with the Foster's team, we've pushed the boundaries as to quite how much space we can create on the site and how we can bring those uses together most effectively.
Well, let's come to you, Russell, because you have the task of making all this happen. I hope you're listening very soberly there to all the things you're meant to be doing. Tell us, because I guess for you as well, when you get given a plot where all of these things are possible, you can build tall and you can do 3 towers, not 1. Kind of an exciting project. But how did you approach this as an idea?
Putting into context, this was post-COVID when we just started the project. So it was really an opportunity to start thinking about the future of communities coming together. And I think that was driven by the brief from Heinz. So we weren't really talking about areas and quantities on day one. It was about bringing together office, residences, local people, community, and how could we create a local destination. And that was almost the brief on day one. The design kind of evolved over its time. It sort of went up and down, and various sort of external constituents sort of drove some of that thinking. But it was really, how could we produce a mixed-use community that had an identity that was sort of local to the DNA of Southwark? And I think that's what makes this project slightly different as well, because it's very contextual. Yes, it's high-rise. People could say it's sort of a different context, but it's very much designed for that location. From a placemaking point of view, I think it was really looking at the history and heritage of the site. I come from South London. I was sort of born in South London. And that whole kind of stretch of the river, once you sort of move away from the cultural institutes, it's warehouses, it's factories. It was kind of, there used to be a hat factory on the site. So it was courtyards and yards and things like that. So the idea of bringing people together in spaces set back from the street was kind of a historic clue that we took and utilised to create the central space. We then thought about, this is a site, as Ross said, that has been 20 years abandoned. And really, it was about trying to stitch the streetscape back together. We know there's a massive amount of footfall that runs through the sites because you're connected to 3 major train stations and then obviously the tube station just down the road. So a massive amount of people move past it. And how can we bring those people back into the site where historically they would have flown through it? So that was kind of almost how the site got manipulated around this kind of central hub space in the middle. And then almost like the portions of the site that were left over became the footprints for the towers. So they kind of grew out of that people movement strategy and placemaking. That's what really drove the parcels for the high-rise elements.
Before we go back to the developing side of it, just tell me, you also set quite a high standard for sustainable building, one of the highest for an office building we've seen in London. Tell us what you've done there and why that was significant.
It comes from designing from the inside out a little bit. So I think post-COVID, how can you design the best working environment, the best quality air, daylight? How can you nourish the existence of the people that work inside? We're talking about 5,000 people here. And we're in the context of trying to bring people back from working at home where they've had flexibility. If they're lucky, they have green spaces at home or they have more control over the environment. So how can we bring people back together into a workplace? And I think what's really interesting here, we're not designing these buildings for me. I'm actually designing it for my children. People that are going to be here in 5 and 10 years' time in the workplace. And what do they want? And they are quite discerning. They want the best quality air. They really want a good environment. And they want to be in a place where it meets their values. And when you sort of speak to these people, they are concerned about the environment. So quality of experience and the environment is super important. And I think that's what collectively with Heinz really drove that kind of criteria. It's got to be best in class from a sustainability point of view because that's the right thing to do.
So Ross, I can see the description here. It's the lowest whole life carbon high-rise development that's been in London. Quite a lot of words. What does that mean for me, the citizen in this city? Why does this matter?
It matters because it's what the occupiers... We're creating a place that could accommodate a bank, a law firm, media firm, tech company. This is a part of London that we think will appeal to occupiers from lots of different sectors. And if you go to the websites of those businesses, whether they're a law firm, a bank or any one of those things, actually quite a lot of what they say about themselves in the first few pages of the website is what good corporate citizens they're going to be, what good employers they're going to be, what they stand for beyond what their discipline is in industry, what they stand for as a firm. These are statements. When these big firms are signing leases in these kind of buildings, they're making a statement to the market. Sometimes it's making a statement to their competitors. But more often than not, it's making a statement to the people they want to hire about what they stand for as a firm. And unless you're delivering buildings that have all of those credentials, they're not able to prove to the world that they really mean what they're saying. And there's a huge war for talent in London. Again, to Russell's point, we're creating buildings for the next generation, and people of that generation care about different things. I remember when I left university, I cared about how much was I going to get paid. If I was lucky to get offers from different firms, that was what was really driving me to make the decision about which firm I went to. I'm sure that plays a part of the decision-making today. But more and more, the kind of real estate the firms are operating, what they're standing for, how they're connecting with the community, those are the things that are causing the smart grads to make decisions as to which firms they go to. So as a developer, these are things you have to get right.
And tell me, one of these things that you're talking about there, which I think is, the connection with the community and things, is not one of these buildings, well, it doesn't look like from the plans, there's some invisible barrier, even though there's no barrier. You're enticing people to come inside. There's going to be programming, cultural elements. Is that significant these days when you do on these projects, that there isn't a kind of an invisible barrier around it? It doesn't feel like a glass tower that people shy away from?
Yeah, correct. And we're really striving in this kind of 3-level podium that we've got that connects all the spaces. We're really striving for that to be as open to as many different people as possible. So there's a really cool auditorium space that goes in on this bridge space that sits on the Stamford Street elevation, which is the north elevation of the site. For sure, some of the corporate firms that are occupiers in the tower will use that for their presentations to staff or external shareholders or whatever it might be, but we have ambitions for the local community to use that space as well. So looking at creating spaces that can be used in different ways by different people at different times of the day or different times of the week. So really enlivening all 3 levels there as much as we possibly can. There will obviously need to be some hard security lines at some point. Firms care very much about security, but the ambition is to lift those hard security lines up beyond the typical ground floor plane, so that there's a lot of interaction in those lower levels.
I think that was one of the things that came out of the early discussions, is about these spaces where the workforce can meet the local community. They're really important to the authenticity of the project. So it's like the village hall. The sort of auditorium space that sort of Ross is talking about really is a community space as well. So it's not just for the sort of those workers upstairs to use and come down. It's a place where programming activities, the coming together of people, which has been a theme that's evolved over the project but really become more refined. It's really about bringing people together. And I think the workforce today really value being a part of the community as well. They don't want to be anonymous anymore. They don't want to be in the sort of the glass sort of rectangular tower anymore. They want to be a part of a place. And I think that's what's been wonderful with the programming that Heinz have been weaving in. It's about how can you bring local people, residents, or new residents that are part of the community, and the office workers to come together. And I think that's going to be a lovely mix on this project.
I think there is a positive shift you see in London. There's a kind of mixing up of people more and more. But as you've done this project, and you said it's moved pretty quickly from 2018, how much community engagement and things did you have to do at the beginning before you even start saying what you're going to be putting up?
Lots. I mean, putting something new in the city, there's always going to be voices that have issues with it. But what's been fantastic has been an engagement with the local community right from the very, very start. First of all, finding out what they do and don't want. They know this is an opportunity for high-rise development in its location that was already designated. But it's really finding what they want in that project and what they don't want. There was a previous consent that had a hotel. They didn't want that. What they're interested in is community spaces, community shops, access to facilities. That's the kind of things they wanted, and public space, but an opportunity to rejuvenate some of the land that we have around the site, like the church gardens immediately adjacent to us, which have sort of fallen by the wayside. There's an opportunity to now sort of embrace those spaces and draw that into our public space.
And who got to do the naming, the round?
I'd like to say I could pick out one person that I could...
Yourself, maybe?
Definitely me, yeah. No, we had an extensive number of work. I remember one time being in our boardroom with playing card size pieces of paper spread all across our boardroom table with every different word you could possibly imagine. And we were with the Foster's team, with marketeers, with the Heinz team, et cetera, working through what it might be. But physically, there is this round space, the historical connotation of people coming around to gather, be it around the fireplace, be it around the dinner table on a Sunday. There were lots of ways which we thought we could weave the round in. And yeah, it just felt like a fitting name. So the ambition is that people imagine this whole place as the round. Whether we name the individual buildings is still very much to be confirmed. But the ambition is that just like people describe King's Cross as a place, this becomes known as the round.
And also it's quite a nice term from theatre as well, in the round, a sense that you're listening to everybody. Everyone gets a good view. Everybody is part of the same experience.
Exactly. And I mean, historically, there was the Blackfriars Rotunda just north of the site. So there was a historic round space, a sort of debating space. So that was one of the first kind of, dare I say, nods to sort of the local context.
And Ross, tell me, I was pretty staggered at the sum that you also contribute to the local council. It's an agreed levy. But again, Southwark is a really interesting borough in London because there are parts of it that are super wealthy along the river and there are other parts that are not. So again, there's lots of things that you end up being involved which aren't even on the site, I guess.
Yeah, look, Southwark have been a pleasure to work with over the past 3 years because this is a big project. It's politically quite sensitive, so clearly people in Southwark care about it, but it will be seen from lots of other places outside of Southwark. So having Southwark's support as we negotiated with the many stakeholders has been really important. But it's a strategically important site for them. As you come across the bridge into the borough of Southwark, there it is, smack bang in front of you, sat there empty for the past 2 decades. So I think it's really important for them to see this project happen. There's been some previous planning permissions that have been granted over the past 10 to 15 years that were never really implemented, and I think that's got some people's backup. So it's important for them to see it happen, but it's a big revenue generator for them. When this 800,000 square foot office is occupied, that's going to be a generator of significant business rates. So I think it's economically very important from Southwark's perspective that this happens, both in terms of the financial benefits generated on site, plus, as you mentioned, the contributions that we make to other parts of the borough, which in many cases need the funding. And just dialing back to where we started in terms of why we acquired this site, the ability to deliver a building of this quality, but in a location that was far more diverse, really appealed to us, because there's clearly some really big, cool buildings in the city. But back to what we think occupiers want and the way in which they want to engage with their local communities, this felt like a really unique opportunity to provide a best-in-class, high-calibre office building and residential buildings that will be occupied by a leading firm in one industry or the other, but an opportunity for that firm to engage with a very diverse local community that's very different to the one that would be around them if they were in the city, for example.
Ross Blair and Russell Hales, thank you both for joining me today on The Urbanist. And that's all for this week's episode of The Urbanist. You can follow us for new editions of the show every week, and you can subscribe to Monocle magazine for reports on all things design, architecture and urbanism too. Just visit monocle.com. This episode was produced by Carlotta Ribello and by David Stevens, who also edits the show. I'm Andrew Tuck. Goodbye, and thank you for listening, City Lovers.